G'day everyone, welcome to today's Property WOD. It's Michael Beresford here from OpenCorp, back after a lovely sunny week in Port Douglas, and going to talk today about the budget. Now, the budget actually came out about 3 weeks ago, but this is a very deliberate approach that we've taken to talk about the budget three weeks or so after the budget announcements were actually made public. Okay, and I'll tell you why in a second. But to recap what happened in the budget, because Scott Morrison talked very quickly for those of you that saw it, and everything was rattled through over about 45 minutes, so there was a lot to cover. Okay, we're going to keep it pretty simple. The four key things to do in the budget were all around the government's message, number one, of jobs and growth. And that is something, as the election campaign has started to gain momentum, that the coalition has been talking about at length. So very much on the Labor side about health and education and trust, which I find funny, and on the coalition side, jobs and growth. So they're the key different messages. But back to the budget, around jobs and growth, there were major announcements around businesses and business tax benefits into the future. Obviously negative gearing was raised, superannuation was a big one, and finally infrastructure. So those four key things under the banner of jobs and growth. I'll leave super till last because that's probably the biggest hitter. But it was very interesting to hear the Treasurer, Scott Morrison, talking about the fact that there are 870,000 businesses in Australia that employ between 3 and 4 million Australians. So that's a really significant chunk of the working population being employed by business. So one of the major strategies that was announced, or policies that was announced, was a phasing over time to bring the current company tax rate of 30% down to 25% over the next 10 years. So that was a step progression, down to 27% in around 7 to 8 years, and then 25% after that. The whole purpose of that, obviously having a stimulatory effect where if businesses are paying less tax and have more money in the coffers, that will promote spending on materials and obviously help manufacturing and all the related industries that bring those products to market. Obviously wage growth as well, and investment in jobs, because they'll be able to have the same, they'll have more money in the kitty to be able to employ more people, which will help their productivity, and that will obviously start a positive domino effect around growth and jobs. So that's the first one. The second one, negative gearing, is the one, all of you property investors out there, it's something we get asked about a lot. The government's position, or the coalition's position on that hasn't changed since they first came out, saying that negative gearing won't be touched. And basically what they talked about is that 2/3 of the people that claim a negative gearing benefit claim under 10,000 as a negative gearing benefit, and they earn under 80k. Okay, so the popular belief out there, if you hear it amongst the media and the Labor rebuttals, is that negative gearing is a tax break for the rich. Then the numbers don't support that claim. Okay, around infrastructure as the third one. The coalition announced as part of their budget a massive $50 billion infrastructure plan. Now, there were some major policies as part of that, and that will be fed nationally into a number of infrastructure projects. Okay, but the point being, major ones, they were talking about inland rail for a couple of reasons. One, from Brisbane to Melbourne. A second one, to promote and increase export activity. So, obviously a way, part mining and services, agriculture, etc., to be able to get goods from the area where they're farmed or produced, obviously to ports, to be able to increase that export activity. The other component of the infrastructure plan was also around jobs as well. So the acronym that was used on the night was the PATH project. Basically what it is a strategy to be able to help kids get jobs and help teenagers and the youth of today get into jobs, because one of the numbers that they talked about was that 12% of kids in Australia today under the age of 15 come from jobless families. Okay, so that was the stimulation for that policy to come out to really try to improve the youth unemployment rate in Australia. So speaking of unemployment and thinking around pay and so forth, I've talked a lot about pensions in previous WODs, and that brings us to the fourth kind of key pillar of the government's message, being superannuation. Okay, and superannuation was probably the area, well, not probably, definitely the area that was hardest hit in terms of tax breaks. And in essence, what the government is looking at is cracking down on the super tax concessions that people get paid. Now, without getting into all the lingo, to keep it really, really simple for you. Hey guys, we're back. So, as you know, these WODs are one-take WODs, and nothing's changed. This is still one take, but I could sense that even I was starting to get a bit confused with what I was saying to you, and this stuff is much more simply told with a basic summary. So that I'm not talking to the whiteboard with my backs to you guys, we've taken a couple of minutes out just to write up some of the key pillars of the superannuation reforms as part of the budget. Okay, so as a quick recap, for those of you that may or may not be aware of how the superannuation system works now, basically we've summarised it here on the left-hand side. Okay, so in short, if the superannuation contributions that are made into your super fund, whether it be a self-managed fund or an industry fund or whatever, in the form of personal contributions you make, the contributions that your employer makes, as a total that amount, if that is less than $35,000 a year if you're aged over 50, or up to $30,000 a year if you're aged under 50, on those contributions you're taxed at 15%. Okay, and also if you have either the 30 or the 35,000 in super, depending on your age, if more than that amount goes into super, then the amount of tax that you pay over and above this threshold then increases to 30%. Okay, so it's just like a marginal tax rate with your personal income. Okay, so let's say I'm under 40, so I'd fit into this category. Between nothing and 30,000 going into super, personally I would be taxed at 15% on that. If I then increase the contributions into super over that 30,000 threshold, then anything over that 30,000 would be taxed at the higher rate of 30%. Okay. Now, when we're talking about personal tax rates or marginal tax rates, currently at the moment, one of the brackets is where your taxable income is between 37,000 and 80,000. The marginal tax rate that applies today is 32.5% MTR, marginal tax rate. Okay, so that's a quick snapshot on how it works right now. If we have a look at what these changes have been, then and what might come in should the coalition come into power and these policies be implemented, basically what they're doing is reducing the amounts or the caps that could go into super before you're exposed to paying more tax. Okay, so one of the things the government said is they want to make sustainably ensure that the pension can continue to be provided, and part of the way to do that is to tax more heavily those in the workforce to be able to support the increasing number that aren't, and that's stuff that we've talked about in previous WODs. So if we have a look at what their proposal is, regardless of age, the threshold where a 15% tax rate applies has come down to 25,000. So currently it's 30 or 35 depending on your age. This is a flat cap of 25,000. Okay, anything over that 25,000 per annum into super would attract the same higher tax rate at 30%. Okay, so important to keep these things in perspective. Some of you might be thinking out there, well, if I'm putting a lot more money into super and it exceeds this amount, well, I'm paying a lot more tax, I'm paying double. Just bear in mind that if you're earning an income where the employer contribution is this amount, so 250k as a round number, then the personal tax rate at that level is 49%. Okay, so you're still getting a concessional tax rate by putting the money into super, as opposed to it being part of your personal taxable income. Okay. So leading into what are the changes to the personal tax rates, safe to say in this budget, being in an election year, it deviated from history whereby typically the incumbent government will use the budget in the election year to promote significant personal tax cuts as a way of being in favour in the year of the election. This year it was quite skinny. There was only one minor change to personal tax cuts or tax rates, and this was increasing the threshold from 80,000 to 87,000 as a taxable income where the 32.5% marginal tax rate applies. Okay, so that might sound like a lot, but kept in perspective, the maximum saving that provides you, if you fall into this category, is $315 over the course of the year. Okay, so there's a whole range of details and stuff around if you're in retirement phase and what's taxed and what's not, and caps on super and so forth. Definitely worth getting some financial advice around that if you are in that retirement phase or close to retirement phase. But for those of us out there that are still working, having super contributions paid by our employer, maybe putting in some extra ourselves and so on, definitely earning a taxable income. Here's a snapshot for you on the key outtakes from the budget. Okay, so just to summarise, guys, three key things that the budget talked about. Number one, the government needs to continue to live within its means and make savings, reduce the budget deficit that we have. Secondly, major taxation reform that has to happen, specifically around superannuation. Okay, and thirdly, continually peddling their message of jobs and growth is what Australia's about heading into the future under a coalition government. Okay. Hope you found that helpful. A lot of detail there, guys, but we do get asked questions about the budget and what it means for people. So we've tried to keep it fairly high level summary around the key things that apply to most Australians. Hope you found that useful. The one thing I do want to finish on, right, is remembering that this budget came out 3 weeks ago. And apart from superannuation, how much or how many of the components in the budget have actually been talked about as part of the election campaign? Very, very few. So we talk often about, and Al and Cam talk often about, white noise. Okay, it's really important, while you need to understand key components of the budget, don't make rash decisions based on what might happen, or hold off making financial decisions on what might happen in the future. Make your decisions based on today, because a lot of these changes won't actually take effect from July 1 next year. So a full 13 months or so from now. Okay, so stay focused on your goals and what you want to achieve. Understand this stuff, but don't let that white noise derail you, and specifically, take action on certain conditions today that can provide an advantage to your personal situation. We'll catch you next time.